What would happen to your brain if you had no social contact whatsoever? Would you turn into a wild animal? Would you start speaking another language? Well, here are some of the things that would happen to your brain according to science. If you were completely cut off from society, your brain would start to shut down. If you had absolutely no social contact, your brain would literally start to shut down because it needs social interaction in order to function properly. You see, throughout human evolution, we have always lived in groups. It's only relatively recently that humans have started living alone. And even now, people still need social interaction in order to thrive. According to research conducted at the University of California, Los Angeles, and published in the journal, people who have little to no social contact experience an increase in loneliness and also suffer physically as a result. The study states, the neuroendocrine system, which regulates physiological responses to stress, shows heightened activity in the solitary individuals. This means that your body would be constantly stressed if you had no social interaction. Eventually, this would cause all of your other bodily functions to start shutting down one by one. No. 2. You would forget how to speak. Even if you didn't completely forget how to speak, you would at least forget how to speak properly. You see, the way that we speak is something that we learn when we are very young. It comes naturally to us because we are constantly using it. But if you were cut off from all social interaction, you wouldn't need to use language anymore, so your brain would start to forget how to do it. Research has shown that if you don't use it, you lose it. So the part of your brain that is responsible for language would begin to shut down in the same way that you forget a language if you do want to use it. Researchers from MIT and Harvard conducted a study in which they observed two groups of people, one that spoke regularly and another that only spoke occasionally. After a few weeks, the group that spoke only occasionally had started to forget certain aspects of their native language. They found that the less you use your native language, the more your brain starts to forget it. So if you stop speaking altogether, you would probably forget your native language within a couple of months. No. 3. Your emotions would become stunted. Emotions are something that we learn through our interactions with other people. If you were raised without any social contact, you wouldn't be able to develop emotions the way that we normally do. This means that you wouldn't be able to feel anything. Scientists have conducted many studies on this, and they have concluded that emotions are something that we learn, just like we learn a language. If you were raised in total isolation, you wouldn't be able to develop emotions until you started interacting with people. At this point, you would start to develop emotions, just like a child does. However, if you continued to live in total isolation, you would still be able to feel emotions. You would just have difficulty expressing them because you wouldn't know how. Number 4. You would regress. Without social contact, you would eventually start to regress. This means that you would start acting like a wild animal, because that is how your brain would tell you to act. In fact, your entire nervous system would start to change. Some of your senses would become sharper while others would become dulled. Your brain would essentially start to rewire itself in a way that would make you more primal. Scientists believe that if you lived in total isolation for long enough, you would eventually revert back to a more primitive state. This is because your brain would no longer need to use the higher functions that we use to interact with other people. Instead, it would focus on the more primal functions that would help you survive in the wild. Lastly, 5. Your brain would start to deteriorate. If you had no social contact whatsoever, your brain would start to deteriorate rather quickly. This is because the human brain needs social interaction in order to stay sharp. When you don't have any social contact, your brain starts to shut down because it doesn't need those functions anymore. This causes the brain to start deteriorating. Scientists have studied this by putting people in social isolation tanks, where they are deprived of all social interaction. After a few days, these people start to show signs of brain deterioration. They become confused and disoriented, and their brains start to show signs of stress. All in all, if you were completely cut off from society, your brain would start to shut down rather quickly. You would lose your language skills and you would start to regress to a more primitive state. Eventually, your brain would start to deteriorate and you would end up dying.